The Milky Way galaxy, which lies before you, is ancient. Cosmologists estimate it to be about 13.6 billion years old. That's pretty close to the beginning of the cosmos as we know it anyway. But all around the Milky Way galaxy are fossils of something even more ancient. We just passed by one just there on the right, and if you back up to about 18 seconds into this video and press play, you'll see it. But for now, let's swing our view toward the core of our galaxy and look in the top left. You can see one of those fossils just now going out of view. And all around the core, there are many others, appearing to float, but actually orbiting our galaxy. Tight, dense knots of stars. These are globular clusters, and they date back to the very dawn of the era of galaxy formation. Nobody really knows exactly how old they are, nor what triggered their formation. It is thought that in the ancient past, near the very beginning of the universe, there was an era of cluster formation before the era of galaxy formation. We do know that there appears to be some strange relationship between globular star clusters and galaxies themselves. Analyses of the star clusters surrounding many galaxies have indicated that the combined mass of the globular clusters roughly corresponds to the estimated mass of the superblack hole at the heart of that galaxy. How or why this is, or if it is purely epiphenomenal, none of the above is known. At this time, we are entering the star cluster known as Messier 13, NGC 6205, or the Great Globular Cluster in Hercules. Notice, there's no nebulosity in here. There are a lot of red stars, however. Estimates range between 300,000 and 500,000. It's hard to tell exactly how many stars are in a globular star cluster because the hearts of star clusters are very bright, and globular clusters contain many red dwarf stars which can live for 1 trillion years or more. Those stars may be long-lived, but they're also very faint. But because there are so many stars compacted into such a small area, sight of them can be lost in the brightness of so many thousands of stars in such relatively small areas. In fact, the Hercules globular cluster is only some 125 light-years wide, with up to 500,000 stars. That makes the density of stars in that area as much as 1,000 times greater than the density of stars in the region of space surrounding our own star. And this density leads to some of the stars in globular star clusters to running into each other at times. The new stars that emerge from this mergers are hotter, bigger, and burn blue. They're often known as blue stragglers. But by and large, the stars of globular star clusters orbit stably in a variety of directions all around a central core, interacting with each other very little, and the globular star clusters themselves interact with the stuff of the universe very little as well. The globular clusters tend to have their own orbits that are independent of the planes of the galaxies they move around. So most of the time, globular clusters don't even interact with their galaxies, except those times they pass through. Messier 13, as you can see, is a long way outside of our galaxy right now. At this point in its orbit, Messier 13 is 22 to 25,000 light-years from Earth. And, by the way, our star system is down there on the right. It is believed that at the core of Messier 13, there is a black hole. Maybe it's better to say that is hotly debated. But if we continue moving into the heart of Messier 13, and we were to come across that singularity, it might look something like this. Around it, we could expect to find a bright core of inner stars, within a compact realm of light illuminated by hundreds of thousands of stars within 62.5 light-years in every direction. It would not be a very active black hole because one finds very little in the way of dust and gases within a globular cluster. The only exception would be if the globular cluster happens to be passing through the plane of the galaxy and at that time runs through a dust cloud. At that time, the shockwaves of the passage may well lead to the formation of some new stars within the globular cluster, but other than that, no new stars. So far, we've only been looking at a simulation, a very good simulation, but just a simulation, portraying Messier 13 and its heart. But here is the real heart of the Hercules globular cluster. Countless stars in blinding brightness. And you can see between them the occasional blue straggler, stars that have merged when various smaller stars ran into each other, as well as numerous small, cool red stars among them. Astrophotographers have always found globular star clusters to be challenging to image because the incredible concentration of stars means they have extremely bright interiors, making globular star clusters almost universally high dynamic range targets. They tend to be by themselves off in intergalactic space, so the space that surrounds them is very dark, as you can see here. And as one moves from the surrounding space into the cluster, we get an area of mid-brightness, and then moderately higher brightness, and then a fairly sudden transition into the intense brightness in the core. The brightness of star clusters, I think, leads many astrophotographers to underestimate just how much integration time they require. After all, if something is bright, it shouldn't take that long to shoot, right? The Great Globular Cluster in Hercules has an apparent magnitude of 5.8, making it quite bright as DSOs go. In fact, bright enough for a human to see with the naked eye under dark skies. But the problem is, globular clusters are filled with lots of stars, and many of the stars are very faint. To resolve them takes lots of integration time, ideally done with short subframe exposure times. It needs lots of integration time to bring out the high frequency detail, which resolves those almost invisible stars that can be lost in brightness. And they need short subframe exposure times to avoid blowing out the brighter areas. Even then, globular clusters benefit from specific approaches to imaging and specific approaches to development, because without both done right, detail is lost. For several years, I've been experimenting with techniques to image and develop globular clusters in an effort to capture and resolve every star possible. And I finally developed the methodology to the point it's ready to present. So today, we're going to learn how to both shoot and develop globular clusters in such a way as to reveal every last detail in these fossils of the early cosmos. And good news for those of you who prefer to use one-shot color cameras. It turns out imaging globular clusters is best done with a monochrome camera, either in RGB or with a one-shot color camera. The luminance channel, which I am so fond of for pretty much every other kind of deep sky object, is actually a hindrance when shooting globular clusters. Globular clusters are deep sky objects that lend themselves to shooting either with an OSC or one-shot color camera or in RGB with a monochrome camera. I've shot them for years using my usual method, LRGB, and was always a bit disappointed with the results. The reason being, their stars have color, but the color, well, it's not right to call it faint, it's more that it's washed out in brightness. And shooting them on the luminance channel tends to exacerbate that problem. With globular clusters, you want to be sure to capture as much color information as possible. And the best way to do that is shoot entirely color information. If you're using a monochrome camera, that means using RGB filters. Or, alternatively, you can use a one-shot color camera, which is always only shooting RGB information. It's just pre-combined on the camera sensor. While it's technically possible to shoot globular clusters with narrowband filters, stars are broadband emitters. They emit every spectrum of light. And globular clusters are made entirely of stars, so to capture their colors properly, you need to work with broadband information, whether that comes from RGB or a one-shot color camera. Globular clusters are also high dynamic range objects. They are often floating out in intergalactic space, where they are much brighter than the surrounding space. And they tend to have rapid transitions in brightness as one moves from the inner mass of the globular cluster to the outer mass, and then ultimately into that space. So when shooting them, it's important to make sure that the light curve of your histogram does not go off the right, which would indicate that information has been lost by being blown out. Though, I find it's much better to shoot globular clusters with short subframe exposure times, because that will capture all the information from the fainter stars, while never allowing the brighter stars to get anywhere close to blowing out, which gives you a lot more latitude in final development. You really want to minimize any opportunity for noise to turn up in an image of a globular cluster. Because when you move into the development phase, you're going to be working with an object with tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of stars, some as small as just a couple of pixels. Eliminating as much noise as you can minimizes the possibility of mistaking noise for stars. So, to get the best compromise between dynamic range and read noise, I keep my camera set to HCG +5. On my Player One Aries M camera, HCG is 125. And I set it another 5 points above that to make sure that it is well and truly in the HCG mode. Bear in mind that the gain level to activate the HCG mode varies from one camera to another, even if the cameras are made by the same maker, so check your specs. So to sum up, shoot them either in one-shot color or with a monochrome camera only in RGB, and ideally image them with short from exposure modes with the camera set for HCG mode. On my setup, which is a Celestron C8 telescope with a Player One Aries M camera, I just shoot them in RGB with subframe exposure times of 60 seconds. After you have imaged the globular cluster and stacked the subframes, you're either going to end up with a single master from a one-shot color camera or R, G, and B masters from a monochrome camera. Since I am using a monochrome camera, I'm going to cover how to develop the RGB information. Bear in mind, the process is almost the exact same with the information from a one-shot color camera. A lot of people approach one-shot color cameras as if their information is very different from that obtained from monochrome cameras. A color camera is just a camera with a monochrome sensor with RG and B filters permanently laid over the sensor. So the majority of the development is going to be very similar. The only difference is that with a one-shot color camera, you'll likely have to remove that green overcast, and you would do that by way of whatever standard method that you use. With information from a monochrome camera, you'll have to balance the RG and B channels and then combine them. Alright, let's hop into development. I used the weighted batch preprocessor in PixInsight to do the stacking, but you can stack your subframes with whatever your preferred stacker is. I'm also going to use PixInsight to do a few essential development steps before moving on to more advanced layer-based developing and then final color balancing in Photolab. So, I've just dragged the masters in. I'm going to label each of the masters. When developing, always be careful to label whatever frames you're working on, and label any essential points in development. We have a saying in the scientific world, if it isn't written, it didn't happen. And I can pretty much guarantee that with something as complex as good astrophoto development, if you don't carefully label, you're going to take steps and then come back and wonder, did I take that step on this image or that image? And you'll have to guess it from there and maybe even start over. Taking a moment to properly label everything is going to save you time and frustration down the road. So I have my three masters labeled R, G, and B. Now I'm using the screen transfer function to illuminate them. They all look good. I expected them to look good. It was a perfectly clear night with superb transparency in seeing when I shot them a couple nights ago. The only problem was there was a 76% moon, 3/4 full, but that moonlight is easy enough to extract. We'll get to that later. The first thing I need to do is color balance these images. As I've mentioned in previous videos, I am not a fan of PixInsight's new color balancing methods such as the spectrophotometric color calibration. It's persnickety about plate solving, and I find the colors that it produces are not good. I much prefer to stick with the old-fashioned linear fit method of color balancing. That means I run each sub through the statistics measure and observe the median measurement. Whatever image has the lowest median will become the reference image for linear fit. In this case, it's going to be the green image. So, I'll open the linear fit tool and drag the green tab into the linear fit reference box. Then I'll drag the action icon of the linear fit tool over the non-reference color images. When that's done, I'll drag the tabs from the R, G, and B channels into the channel combination tool. Then I'll shrink the original masters and get them out the way because we won't need them anymore. Once they're out of the way, I'll activate the channel combination tool and that will produce a combined RG and B master. Then I'll use the screen transfer function to view the channel combination and color balance. Looks good so far. I'll label this new combined image RGB and move on to the next development steps. You can see the influence of the moonlights in the image on the bottom side. Notice how the dark has that red chromatic cast. I need to extract that from the background before moving on. But there are some stacking artifacts right around the very edges of the image. See that green up there in the top right? So first I've opened the dynamic crop tool and I'm just going to select the areas to crop out, keeping it roughly square and preserving as much of the image as possible. Now, apart from the color balancing, channel combination, and cropping, this image is just the raw R, G, and B masters with all their information combined. I'm going to save this image as a 32-bit XISF image and label it as for Gragspert, then open up Gragspert and extract the background. With Gragspert evoked, I'll now open the image. Gragspert is remarkably easy to use now with its implementation of AI for background extraction. It's very good AI, it does a good job. So the image is opened and I've given it a little bit of temporary stretching so that we can see what we're working with. I'm just going to open the background extraction tab, set the smoothing strength at 1 and begin the extraction. The task is completed in about 10 seconds, and it makes a very significant difference. This is perfect. Now I'm going to once again save this as an unstretched 32-bit XISF and bring this new Moonlight extracted RGB back into PixInsight. I'll use the screen transfer function once more to create a temporary stretch so that we can see what we're working with. Now I'm going to deconvolve the stars with the Blur Exterminator. I'll first run it on this new master in the correct mode. If there are any minor aberrations in the stars, the correct mode will round those out. I don't expect any. I just recollimated the SCT for the first time in 3 years just 2 weeks ago. And in focus checks, the donuts are perfect, so these stars are perfect. Still, it never hurts to take the extra step and be on the safe side, so I'll invest an extra minute and let the Blur Exterminator run in the correct mode. When it's done, I'll set the Blur Exterminator to default mode and run it again. Now it'll properly deconvolve the stars. The deconvolved stars are about to come into view. There we go, nice and sharp. Now we're getting into one of the key steps in how to reveal all the stars in the globular cluster. The stars are revealed in the darker areas, and by and large they're revealed in the median areas. It's in the bright central areas where we lose them. Imagine the image is divided into 3 zones by brightness. The brightest here, middle brightness here, and dimmest occupying the outer portions away from the globular cluster. Because while imaging, we used short exposures and a high dynamic range HCG setting, and never allowed the light curve to blow off the right side of the histogram, all the information is conserved within this master. We just can't see it because the screen transfer function, which allows us to see the master, is only a temporary stretch, but it completely blows out the center of the globular cluster. To conserve that information in the final development, or in other words, to reveal all the stars, we need to develop for the 3 brightness regions of the globular cluster. We'll start by doing a brightness development. But first, I need to clone this image 3 times and designate one RGB dim, another RGB mid for mid bright, and another RGB bright. Now I'm going to operate on the image designated RGB bright. I'll open the histogram tool and do a strong stretch on it to bring out the dimmest stars in the outer regions of the space around the globular cluster. What I'm going to do is stretch enough that I can see those stars clearly, but I want the space to remain fairly dark. Once the space shows signs of lightening, I'm going to back the stretch off just a little bit while making sure that I can still see the faintest stars, and at that point the stretch is done. From this full distance perspective, it's a little hard to observe the faintest stars. So I'm going to use a preview window to crop in on the dark stars in the upper left corner. Now I'll stretch them enough that they are revealed while leaving the space dark. Once I've hit that magic amount, I'll drag the action icon onto the RGB bright master, which will set the histogram stretch into the master. Take note that I'm only moving the left icon and the middle icon. The leftmost icon establishes the black point, and I'm setting the black point icon at the leftmost point of the light curve. More specifically, right at the left of whatever color light curve is most to the left. In this case, that appears to be green. I'm doing this specifically to capture all the information within the image. I want to establish the black point where the light curve begins because that's where the information or signal begins. Moving the middle icon stretches the light curve. Moving it left stretches it higher, making things brighter but increasing contrast. Moving the middle icon right lowers the light curve, decreasing both brightness and contrast. As soon as that's done, I'll run the noise exterminator on the stretched master, save it as a lossless TIFF 16-bit file for later processing in my layer-based photo editor, and move on to the RGB middle brightness image. In the middle brightness image, I'm going to do the exact same thing as I did in the RGB bright image. I'll drag the middle brightness tab into the reference image box of the histogram tool so that we can see its light curve. Then I'll adjust the leftmost icon to the point where the leftmost color channel touches the base of the histogram, establishing a black point there and keeping all the information within the image. Then I'll adjust the middle icon, moving it left to brighten things, moving it right to darken things, until I can clearly see all the stars in the middle brightness region of the globular cluster. And I'll know I've gotten that right when all the middle bright stars are visible while the space is also as dark as it can be. Just like before, I'm zooming in a little bit in order to see those middle brightness range stars more clearly. When I have the brightness where I want it to be, I'll close the preview window and run the action icon over the middle brightness master. Now with the middle bright histogram set, I'll just run the noise exterminator on that master. Then I'm going to also save it as a 16-bit lossless TIFF for later processing in my layer-based photo editor. Now, we need to do the same operation on the RGB dim master. This time, I'm going to zoom in quite a bit so I can see those very small stars in that very compact core. That area is very bright, but the stars are not blown out. They are in there, the information is conserved. We just need to do a stretch specifically to reveal them. Now it's very bright in there, so a good stretch is going to portray that region as bright, considerably brighter than the rest of the image, but it's also going to reveal the individual stars. Once zoomed in, just as before, I'll move the middle icon on the histogram mostly outward, lowering the stretch to dim that inner region. And I will continue to dim until I can make out the individual stars, while not making them too dim so that they don't look artificial. I still want to get the space between the stars as dark as possible, but here, in the very bright inner region, that is secondary to revealing the individual stars, and also showing them at an increased level of brightness, reflecting the transitions in brightness that one would see through a telescope if one were looking at the globular cluster with the naked eye. This keeps the images, I feel, looking as real as possible. And since stars are broadband emitters that our eyes could see if the globular clusters were bright enough, I feel it's especially important to make them look as realistic as possible. The best stretch will show the individual stars, keep the space between them dark, and best reveal their colors. Now let's set the histogram. I'll close the preview window and drag the histogram's action icon onto the RGB dim master to set the histogram into that image. Then, once again run the noise exterminator, and finally save the RGB dim master as a lossless 16-bit TIFF for processing in my layer-based photo editor. I'm in my layer-based photo editor now, Affinity. Used to be Affinity Photo, now it's just Affinity, and these days it's available free. And to be frank, it's just as good and flexible for astrophotography as Photoshop. So I'm going to drag in my 16-bit TIFFs, beginning with the RGB Bright Master, and then the RGB Mid or Mid-Bright Master, and then finally the RGB Dim Master. The masters appear in the layer panel middle right. There are eye-shaped icons to the right of each layer. If I click them off, the layer disappears. If I click them on, the layer reappears. We can do this to quickly visually inspect the differences between each layer. As you can see, and as to be expected, the RGB Bright layer, which has been auto-labeled background by Affinity, it always labels the first thing you put in as background, is overall brighter than the rest of the image, including the space, but that's completely okay. We're going to balance that out later in developing. So I'm going to make the RGB mid-brightness layer visible again and then open a mask. Then I'm going to drag the mask into the RGB mid-brightness layer so it only affects that layer. Then I'm going to hit Ctrl-I to invert that layer. It'll change it from white to black, meaning that all the information in the mid-bright layer is being blocked from showing through. Now we only see the full brightness layer. Then I'm going to open a paintbrush and select the color white. And I'll use it to paint on the mask, which will allow some of the mid-bright information to show through. But before I do that, I'm going to set the paintbrush to 0 hardness. This will make a brush with very soft, diffuse edges. When I paint on the mask, it's going to allow some of the information from the mid-bright RGB layer to show through onto the bright RGB layer. And because the brush is very soft, it will show through seamlessly. You won't be able to tell where the mid-bright information is merging with the bright layer. Now I'm going to center the brush over the core of the globular cluster. Expand the diameter of the brush to incorporate all the interior area of the cluster as well as the middle region, the mid-bright area. Then I'm just going to click it once. And now, all the middle bright area has been darkened enough that we can make out the stars in the mid-bright region. I'll zoom in a little bit and turn the mid-bright layer on and off, and you can see the difference that we've made to the image. It's subtle, but significant. Now, I'm going to turn on the RGB Dim Master. At first, it's going to make the entire image very dim because it's going to cover the whole image. Then, as with the Mid Master, I'm going to open up a mask and put it in the dim layer so it only affects that layer. Right now the mask lets everything through, it doesn't mask out anything. I'll invert the mask, turning it black, which will block all the information from the RGB dim layer, so that we only see the effects of the RGB bright and mid layers. Then, I'll open another brush, making sure that the softness is set to 0 to make a very soft brush, And this time, I'm also going to set the brush's transparency to 33% so that every time I click on the brush, it lets through 1/3 more information. This will allow me to add in layers of the mask bit by bit so I can carefully control just how much of the dim layer shows through. I'm going to make the brush fairly small so it just affects that bright central core. Hold the brush steady, right dead center, and then click once. Then close in and see if I can see the individual stars amidst that brightness. I want to retain a lot of that brightness in order to show how bright the center of the cluster is, so I don't want to dim it too much. But I do need to let enough of the dim layer show through to reveal the individual stars beneath. So one more click at the central position. I'll zoom in again to see if I can make out the individual stars, and it looks like it might benefit from one more click. You might be thinking that I set opacity for 33%, so 3 clicks lets through all of the mask. But each click lets through 33% more mask than what was done last time. So it's 1/3, and then 1/3 of 1/3, and so on. So each time I click on the mask, I'm getting a smaller fraction of information let through the mask, letting me make fine adjustments. I'll zoom in again after that last click, and yes, it's plenty bright in there, and I can make out the individual stars. Now it's time to move on to the next step of developing. So I'm going to export this image as a 16-bit lossless TIFF and work on it now in Photolab. I've dragged and dropped this image into Photolab, and the reason I'm going to use Photolab is Photolab has unparalleled power for stretching light and dark areas, bringing them into balance and revealing everything contained within the information. It's also the most powerful tool I know of for white balancing, and this image yet needs to be white balanced a bit more. And it has an incredible ability to go about color management. So in Affinity Photo, we combined layers to bring out all the individual stars from the outer parts of the globular cluster to the very bright core, and now we're going to help them stand out more. First, I'm going to use a tool called DxO Smart Lighting to adjust the brightness of the image. What it'll do is it'll level and darken all the space and help the space stand out around the individual stars. It'll also bring out the dimmest stars, helping them to stand out more against the darkness of space. And in the doing, intelligently avoid overstretching the light curve so that the bright regions don't blow out, conserving the light, color, and even the individuality of the very bright stars in the interior of the globular cluster. As you can see, with the smart lighting on, even in the heart of the cluster, the individual stars stand out well. I think the image is a little hard to look at though, a little overbright at the core, so it's hard to look at. So I'm going to go to local adjustments and make an adjustment to the brightness just at the core, and dim it just a little, just enough to make it easier to look at. To do this, I'll open a control point circular mask right over the core. You can see how it goes from very dark red to the pink to totally fading out. It has a very soft boundary so that it blends naturally into the effects of the rest of the image. You won't be able to tell any masking has been done there. And in the selective tones, I'll just drag the highlights down a little bit. That'll darken only the very brightest parts of the region, which is there in the center of that core. I'm just going to draw the brightness down a little bit. I don't want to create an artificial look, I just want to make it a little easier on the eyes. DxO has another unique tool called Clearview Plus. It's like a combination of a contrast and high frequency management tool. I'm going to move it up significantly, which will further accentuate the dark space in between the individual stars and the very bright core. And note that I'm still operating on the control point, so only the stars within that defined area are being affected. I've moved the Clearview slider to 31. That's a lot of adjustment, but in the very bright region of the core, it works very well. In the selective tone panel, I'll pull the highlights down to -35 and the midtones panel down to -40. This balances out the extreme brightness of the very bright core very well against the rest of the image. I had switched off the smart lighting to lower the contrast while I was making those luminance adjustments to the core. And I've just turned the smart lighting back on, which does wonders to darken the space, while bringing into visibility all the stars from the dimmest outermost stars to those within the extremely bright core. You may recall from the introductory portion of this video on this globular cluster that collisions between stars within globular clusters happen fairly frequently because the stars are so unbelievably close. Stars within a globular cluster are up to 1,000 times more dense than they are in the space out here in the galactic arms where our own star system is. When those stars collide, their mass combines, making the new star that emerges from that collision much heavier. It becomes hotter and burns brighter. In fact, it burns blue, and those blue stars are called blue stragglers. There are hints of those blue stragglers in this image, but the blue is very faint. And there are also many cool red stars in this globular cluster, but their color too is very faint. It stands out a little more, but it's still very faint. There's actually color there and plenty of it. It's just that what color is there is washed out in the extreme brightness of the core of the globular cluster. So what we're going to do now is turn up the saturation enough to help the color of the blue stragglers and red dwarfs show through clearly. As anyone who watches my videos knows, I'm not a fan of the hypersaturated images, both in regular photography and astrophotography, that have become so popular of late. I'm much more a fan of more natural color that respects the subject. But to bring out the subtle color hidden within all that brightness, we're going to have to push up the saturation pretty high. My goal is to push it up just high enough to be seen, just high enough to stand out to the naked eye. So we're going to pop over to the color management tab, and I'm going to go down to the saturation slider bar below the color wheel and just move the slider bar up until I can clearly see the blue of the blue stragglers. I'm using the blue stragglers as the guideline because, as you can see, the red stands out much more strongly. It becomes clear very quickly. I'll have to push the saturation up until the blue of those blue stragglers stands out. The problem is blue is hot. It's white-ish, so it wants to blend into that very bright background quite easily. So I really have to push the saturation up to make it stand out. But I also want to be careful not to color ram. That's where I push the saturation so hard that it's spilling over into other pixels and really polluting an image in the space, in the other areas where there are other colors, everywhere with color that shouldn't be and with intensity that just should not be. So as soon as I can see the blue beginning to appear among the blue stragglers, I'm then going to switch to the blue channel and then push the saturation up just on the blue, which will help those blue stragglers show up without artificially ramming up the color throughout the rest of the image. You may notice, if you have a good monitor, that this throws the global color off a little. The white balance has become a little skewed, but we'll correct that with a simple hue shift in a moment. There, right here the blue of the blue stragglers is starting to show through really well, but even just operating on the blue channel, I really had to ram the saturation up pretty high. And the problem that occurs when you ram saturation up high is the color spills over into surrounding pixels. It creates a sloppy look. Let me show you one of the best combination worst examples I can think of the heart of this very globular cluster, the M13 cluster. This image of the heart of the Messier 13 globular cluster was shot with the Hubble telescope. Do you see how the red and the blue really spill all over the place? It's like an artist clumsily took a paintbrush and just painted over those stars to emphasize the color there. It's just a splash of color over those stars. This is a NASA image, but it is shockingly sloppy work. We can get that blue to stand out in the blue stragglers and the red in the stars without allowing that sloppy spillover. It's very easy. Let me show you how. We're now back in my image. You can see the cool red stars as well as the blue stragglers very easily. And there is a little spillover, but not much, and I'm going to contain what little there is even more. Under the saturation slider bar, there's a toolbar called Uniformity. I'll just move that a good way over to the left, in fact about all the way over to the left. This forces coloration out of dark pixels, which effectively confines the coloration to the bright stars. There's still a slight color haze, and there should be. Stars are very bright against space, but it's not as broad. It's not the sloppy, heavy spillover anymore. It wasn't before, honestly. This process is neater than whatever NASA did, and it's even neater now. Now, pushing the saturation up so high to bring out the blue stragglers has thrown the white balance off a little bit. I can get it back to where it should be with a simple hue shift adjustment. I'll go back to the complete RGB on the color wheel, grab the hue tab, and rotate up in the warmer direction, and moving very slowly, continue the upward movement until any blue stars showing purplish coloration have reattained their blue coloration. At that point, our coloration is pretty well balanced again. The dark intergalactic space around M13 is still a little bright and carries a little bit of the red coloration from the hue saturation. I can kill two birds with one stone, both darkening the space and getting rid of that unwanted color with a small gamma correction. Gamma operates on the curves tool, bending the entire light curve down from the middle just a little. A single adjustment to gamma 0.95 does the trick. Well, it gets the space to the darkness that I wanted at, but there's still a little red lingering in the space, just a little. To adjust this, I'm going to go back to the Color Management tab and select the Color Picker tool. Then I'll click on a point in the space where the problematic orange-red shows up. I can see in some spaces, it shows up in a very narrow band range of color, and other spaces in a broad band, but it's always between the orange, yellow, and red. So I'll broaden the selection of color on the color wheel and then drive the uniformity slider down, which restricts the ability of orange yellow to show up in dark space. This removes that color from the dark space only without affecting the coloration in the stars. We'll zoom in and double check the work so far. Yes, this is looking really good. Now I'm going to utilize one more technique to further accentuate the stars in the bright core of the M13 globular cluster. I've exported the image from Photolab Beta as a lossless TIFF, and I'm dragging it into Affinity now. Then I'm going to duplicate the image. Then I'm going to rasterize the duplicate. This will allow me to make fundamental changes to the pixel structure of the image because, now that I've rasterized it, I'm going to frequency separate it into its high and low frequency information. Low frequency information contains all the light and shadow and color. You can see it here. High frequency information, which you can see now, contains the fine detail. That's where we see the fine points of stars. Then I'll run the frequency separation operation. Now I'll delete the low frequency layer and duplicate the high frequency layer. One layer I'll designate as linear light, and the other layer I'll designate as soft light. Linear light makes extreme contrast, and soft light gently applies itself to the image below. Now I'm going to make both the high frequency layers invisible. Then just turn on the linear light one, make it entirely transparent, and then on the transparency slider bar, slowly add back transparency a click at a time on the mouse wheel, watching for increased definition of the details, the individual stars, in the heart of the globular cluster, where it is hardest for the individual stars to stand out. The trick is to add back just enough of that high frequency layer so the stars stand out better without making them seem overly crisp and crunchy, which is what happens when you over-contrast an image, which is kind of what high frequency information does to an image. It increases contrast, but in very specific areas. A mere 12% of the high frequency information with the linear light composite mode does the trick. But this will be modified in just a few minutes because now I'm going to add the soft light high frequency layer. You have to kind of play with them a little bit to get them into a good balance with one another to get it to work just right. So I've turned on the high frequency information with the soft light. I'm going to make it entirely transparent with the slider bar. And since soft light adds its information much more gently to an image, I'm just going to drag up the soft light's effects with the slider bar rather than using the mouse scroll wheel like I did with the linear light layer. Slowly adding opacity back to the high frequency layer, which bit by bit adds that soft light composite high frequency information back to the image. And as soon as I can see the individual stars standing out a bit more without looking crunchy, there I stop. And the magic number there is 22%. The image looks a little over crunchy to me though, so I'm going to readjust the high frequency layer with the linear light composite mode. With the soft light information, just 3% linear light is needed. Now, it's perfect. And here's our final outcome. This image does not have much integration time. In fact, only 4 hours and 10 minutes. And it was due to that lack of integration time that it was necessary to fold back some of the image's own high-frequency information on itself to increase the contrast in the high-frequency detail, which helps to separate the stars. With more integration time, that separation will happen naturally, and with more integration time, the separation will look better, as well as the placement and play of light or signal versus dark areas within the image. Let me show you something. I'm going to separate the stars out of the image. Now I'll put the stars on the right and the starless region on the left. What's on the left is tantamount to low frequency information. It's the shades of light and the color information that are left over after removing stars from an image that is nothing but stars. Those squiggles of light are also, you might think of as a form of contrast banding. They result from inadequate information. If you've watched my previous videos on my old methods of developing star clusters, I refer to these as light worms. I mean, look at them. They look a bit like worms made out of light squiggling around in the image. The thing is, those light worms are a symptom of lack of integration. In particular, they indicate that there are small or faint stars unresolved in the background. And what will bring out those small and faint stars? More integration time. I think if I roughly double the integration time, or bring this image up to 8 hours and 20 minutes of total integration, that should resolve most of the unresolved information remaining in the background. And I'm almost certain that if I triple the integration time, almost all of it will be resolved. I don't know that you can ever fully resolve everything, but it'll be very close. But the fact the lightworms exist in the image at all is a solid indicator the image needs more integration time. Low-frequency information, light and color, are fairly quick to gather. High-frequency information, which gives that low-frequency information definition and brings detail to an image, in other words, turns that light and color into discrete stars, takes longer to gather, which is why we have that low-frequency information sitting there in the background, and that low-frequency information represents stars that are not yet resolved. The fact that it's there means the image needs more integration time, and more integration time is the best way to produce a good image. Doubling up on high-frequency information like I did a moment ago is a method I sometimes use to make an image that has insufficient integration look more complete while the project remains ongoing. But it's not ideal. Just remember that. There is no substitute for adequate integration. And the other note is that we as astrophotographers have to respect globular clusters. I have heard that some astrophotographers find them boring subjects and they don't care to shoot them. Other astrophotographers have told me they find them very difficult to develop in a way that looks good because of their tendency to blow out the cores. To me, they are fascinating and mysterious relics of the early cosmos. We don't know how they are formed. We don't understand their relationship to the black holes at the center of galaxies, though there is almost certainly a relationship. And they were formed very early in cosmic evolution. But as far as imaging them, like any DSO, they can look great. Like any DSO, they need sufficient integration time. Enough integration time not just to bring out the brighter stars that we readily see, but the many faint, cool red stars hidden in the background, as well as the more interesting colorful stars like the blue stragglers that you're going to find in many globular clusters. And since imaging globular clusters is literally shooting a collection of stars, and stars are broadband emitters, it makes sense to me that they would do best shot with either monochrome and RGB or with a one-shot color camera, which is also basically shooting in RGB. They do offer plenty of nice color, but the color tends to be washed out in their own brightness. So it's important to keep your exposure short so that you are far from blowing out the brighter areas when you develop them. This will allow you to capture that color better and bring it out later in the developing process. If you have any thoughts, observations, or questions about shooting or developing globular clusters, let me know and I'll provide you what information I can. As always, thanks for watching. Now, get out there and shoot some globular clusters.